December 16, 1944. Early morning Mona, Germany. The hard, frozen ground shook as American guns fired again over their heads. But this morning, something strange was happening. Something so scary and confusing. The shells were not hitting the dirt or the trees. They were blowing up in the air, right above the German soldiers moving forward. Pieces of hot, sharp metal fell down like deadly rain. No hole in the ground could save them. The 326 German soldiers fighting the 38th American Cavalry felt something they had never faced even after years of war in the East. These were not the kind of shots they knew. Not the same hit spots or safe places or holes to hide. This was death coming from above. So perfect it felt like numbers made it happen. At that time, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson from the 406th American Artillery made one of the biggest secret choices of the Battle of the Bulge. He went against his orders. He told his men to use new shells with a hidden power inside them, called proximity fuses. These had small radar parts that could feel how close they were to a target and explode in the air. At the best height, they made the guns 50 times deadlier. The math of killing was changing fast in the cold forest of the Ardennes. The German soldiers could not know that they had just met a weapon so new and powerful, it would change not only this fight, but the whole idea of war. The storm had started. Hitler's plan, called Watch on the Rhine, began with strong hope for his army. His last big try sent 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and almost 2,000 guns, all hidden in the thick fog of the Ardennes. The leader told his generals this attack would split the Allies and take back Antwerp, and maybe turn the war back in his favor. The first big gunfire at 5:30 in the morning on December 16th caught the Americans by total surprise. German guns shot 1,600 shells every minute across the 85-mile front. American intelligence had failed. They had not seen the troop build-up, and many frontline units were replacements or tired soldiers sent to this quiet area to rest. But at Monshaw, Colonel Axelson faced a terrible tactical problem. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small scouting unit, was being beaten by stronger German forces. Regular artillery could not stop the attack in panic. Axelson made a historic choice. He sent right then, now orders to use the secret proximity fuse shells without asking. Higher up, he would later risk a court-martial for this decision, but then he knew that following orders would mean losing the battle. The result was instant and awful. German troops moving in attack lines met a kind of fire they had never seen. The shells burst 30 to 50 feet above them. Each blast sent out a cone of metal fragments that covered more ground than normal ground. Bursts, seasoned soldiers who knew how to hide from usual artillery were cut down in their foxholes, behind trees, and in ditches. The hidden science of killing the proximity fuse showed American science and industry working at their best. Unlike normal shells that needed to hit something or use a timer, which could be wrong, the proximity fuse had a tiny radar no bigger than a coffee can inside each fuse. American engineers packed 130 electronic parts, including 4 or 5 tiny vacuum tubes based on the model that could survive an amazing force when fired about 20,000 times gravity. The physics were hard to believe. At the instant of firing, the acceleration would smash a glass ampule holding electrolyte and make a battery that ran the radar for the short flight. Dr. Merle Tuve at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab drove the work with the focus of the Manhattan Project. The lab hid as an old used car lot in Silver Spring, Maryland, and at its peak, it used 3% of all American physicists. Security was as strict as the atomic bomb project workers. Could not talk work even with families, and each fuse carried a special ID number for tracking. The technical problem had seemed impossible. Vacuum tubes made for home. Radios had to be fully rebuilt to survive being shot from guns. They had to work while spinning at very fast speeds, work in all weather conditions, and be able enough to find targets without early explosion. The breakthrough came from shrinking methods that would later change the electronics business. Dr. James Van Allen's tubes were no bigger than pencil erasers, yet held all the parts of normal radio tubes. By December of 1944, American factories were making 40,000 proximity fuses daily. Over 100 firms helped to the work, from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and Crossley Corporation. The program's cost reached $1 billion in 1940s dollars, second only to the Manhattan Project in wartime spending. Authorization crisis and expansion. Axelson's unauthorized use on December 16th created an immediate command crisis. He had violated direct orders of limiting proximity fuses to anti-aircraft use, fearing that captured examples might be copied and built by the Germans. But the huge effect at Mona was clear. The German attack had been stopped cold, with losses that shocked both sides. Word of the weapon's impact reached Supreme Headquarters quickly. General Eisenhower, seeing the bad situation growing across the Ardennes, formally asked for permission on December 19th. By December 21st, all rules were lifted and proximity fuses were given for general ground combat use across the whole Bulge battlefield. The fast sending that followed showed American supply superiority within days. Proximity fused shells were being sent to artillery units throughout the Aden. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at Bastogne received their allocation just as the German ring closed around the town. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, with their M7 self-propelled howitzers, began using them to defend the northwest approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit, led by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, used them with huge effect southwest of Bastogne. Each unit learned the same truth. Proximity fuses changed artillery from a support weapon into a deciding battlefield tool. Forward observers no longer needed to carefully adjust fire. The fuses would find their own best point to explode. Accuracy needs dropped while killing power rose fast. Bastogne surrounded but stronger. The fight for Bastogne showed perfectly how proximity fuses worked in defense. The 101st Airborne Division, fully surrounded and outnumbered, held the key crossroads against many German attacks. Their artillery had the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, using 75mm pack howitzers that could shoot proximity fused shells between December 19th and 31. The 463rd fired exactly 7,676 rounds by the official record. Not all used proximity fuses because of short supply, but those that did caused terrible fear and loss. German attack lines simply broke apart under the airbursts, with whole platoons gone in seconds. The December 22nd attack, after General McAuliffe's famous nuts answer to the German surrender call, showed the weapon's power. German troops moving across snowy fields in regular lines were caught out in the open. The proximity fused shells blew up above them at just the right time, making overlapping waves of destruction that left no safe places. The all-African-American 969th Artillery Battalion played just as big a part. Their 155mm howitzers made a ring of death around Bastogne's edge that German troops could not break. The larger shells, exploding about 50 feet high, covered even more space with deadly metal. German prisoners later said their attacking groups often fell apart before reaching American lines, with men running from the strange airbursts. The Sauer River slaughter, maybe the best recorded show of proximity, fuse-killing power, happened at the Sauer River near Ectane. On December 25th to 26th, General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was pushing north to save Bastogne, saw this battle himself and wrote about it in his book. War as I Knew It. A German battalion trying to cross the partly frozen river thought they were hidden by darkened fog from American observers. Normal guns would have needed slow aiming and careful fire, letting the Germans finish their crossing or find cover. But proximity-fused shells needed no. That aiming, Patton wrote, we caught a German battalion crossing the Sauer. The new ammo was deadly. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run, the river behind them. Our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies. This figure, 702 killed by actual count, is one of the few exactly recorded death numbers from proximity fuse use. The simple effectiveness was clear. A single battalion basically stopped to exist in minutes, with no chance of escape or defense. The mental effects spread throughout German units in the area, with soldiers refusing orders to do river crossings. Forced war changed the Ardennes thick forests, which Germans counted on for hiding, became death traps when proximity fuses came into the fight. In open ground, a proximity fuse exploding at 30 to 50 feet was deadly enough. But in forests, the effects grew fast. The airburst shattered tree branches, making thousands of extra wooden pieces. These splinters, some as long as a man's arm, moved at hundreds of feet per second, with deadly effect. Normal defense positions, taking cover behind large trees, digging foxholes under root systems, became useless. The fragments and splinters came from above, ending centuries of tactical wisdom about fighting. American guns quickly saw this bigger effect. A single proximity fused 155mm shell exploding above. The forest canopy could clear an area the size of a tennis court. Of all living things, the mix of metal from the shell and wooden splinters from the trees made a 360 kill zone that no amount of skill could avoid. German units trained in forest war found their skill useless. Spreading out to avoid big losses made units open to the wide area effects. Bunching together for mutual support meant entire squads could be killed by single shells. There was no right answer to this new threat. Technical superiority in action. The proximity fuse worked on ideas that seemed like science fiction to 1940s soldiers. Each fuse had a small radio transmitter that worked on 180 to 220 megahertz. It kept sending out waves that bounced off the ground, trees, vehicles, and human bodies. As the shell came near the target, the bounce signal grew stronger when it hit a set level that matched the best burst height. An electronic switch made the shell explode. The whole system had to work in conditions that would ruin normal electronics. During firing, the force reached 20,000 times Earth's gravity, enough to flatten a human body to almost nothing. The shell spun fast and felt centrifugal forces. Temperatures went from the gun barrel heat of 3,000 degrees to freezing cold at top of path. Yet the small vacuum tubes kept working because of smart cushioning systems. And they worked 80% of the time. Tests showed the best burst heights at Aberdeen, proving ground for 105 millimeter. Howitzers, the standard divisional gun, did best at 30 feet. The 155 millimeter guns were deadliest at 50 feet, and the rare 240 millimeter shells made terrible effects at 70 feet or more. Clearing whole map squares of enemy troops. This turned into control on battlefield. Studies found proximity fuses made shells 5 to 10 times more deadly than normal shells. The area hit by lethal fragments grew by 50 times. Anti-aircraft use was even more striking. Shooting down V-1 flying bombs rose from 17% to 79% within weeks of using proximity fuses. German intelligence failed badly when they captured 20,000 proximity fuse shells. In December 1944, they should have made counters, but technical experts looked at the fuses and said they were impossible. The idea of vacuum tubes inside a shell went against what German engineers believed about electronics and ballistics. They thought the Americans used some magnetic trick, or that the parts they saw were fake, hiding a different mechanism. This mistake came partly from institutional blindness. Germany had actually led proximity fuse in truth development before the war. Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin already had working test models by 1940. But Hitler's order to cancel any weapon needing more than 6 months to reach production stopped the program. German engineers could not believe the Americans had fixed problems. They themselves had given up on. The irony was strong because German skill was high. Their electrostatic proximity fuses had shown 95% success in tests using changes in electrical charge instead of radar. If the work had gone on, Germany might have used proximity fuses. By 1941, Hermann Göring later said during questioning that German fuses were only 3 or 4 months from production when the war ended. The Christmas disaster, December 25th, 1944, gave no rest. German units trying to use Christmas for supply and regrouping found that proximity fuses cared nothing about ceasefires. Field kitchens, supply trucks, and meeting points were hit by heavy shelling that needed no spotters. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone fired over 1,000 rounds that Christmas Day, most with proximity fuses. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers shot fast and true, catching German forces off guard. The power to shoot well in bad weather, and at night change artillery from a day weapon into around-the-clock. Danger, the mental shock was huge. German troops had learned to move in bad weather when Allied planes could not fly and observers could not see them. Proximity fuses ended. That safe-time death could strike in any time and any weather, with no warning but the sound of shells coming. Malmedy and Scorzini's elite on December 21. SL Colonel Otto Skorzena's special commandos tried to take Malmedy. These were not normal soldiers but hand-picked men who had saved Mussolini, almost caught Tito, and entered American lines wearing US uniforms. They were Germany's best. They met brutal proximity, fused artillery fire that turned their American disguises from cover into death traps. The shells exploded right above them with scary accuracy, as if they could sense the fakes below. Exact loss counts are argued, but the attack failed terribly with big deaths that stopped Skorzena's later attacks. The mental collapse among the elite SE's troops showed these men felt this deeply important thing. They were raised to believe Germany was better and trained at the highest level, yet they were helpless against American tech. Some who survived ran straight to the American lines, choosing quick death over the never-ending shelling. And this showed total collapse of discipline even in Hitler's fiercest troops. Industrial achievement. The huge production effort for proximity fuses matched any wartime feat. By December 1944, more than 100 American firms were making fuses. Crosley stopped making refrigerators to assemble fuses. Emerson radios switched from home radios to weapons. Sylvania RCA and General Electric set whole plants to the program quality control, beat anything seen before every one of the 130 parts had its own test. Each solder joint was examined with a magnifier. Random pieces were actually fired to prove they would survive. In combat, rejects were thrown away without pity. The workers, mostly women, kept this exacting pace on 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. They did not know what they made because security kept details hidden. They only knew their work was crucial to winning. By December 1944, they were making one proximity fuse every 2 seconds all day and night. The cost drop was amazing in 1942. A fuse cost $732, more than a worker earned in a year. By December 1944, mass production cut the cost to $18 a unit while keeping quality. This made possible 22 million fuses made during the war and 200,000 sent to the Battle of the Bulge alone. Patton's Math General Patton saw how valuable proximity fuses were better than almost any commander. His Third Army moved north to free Bastogne and used the fuses as a weapon to break enemy lines. His artillery chief, Brigadier General Edward Williams, built new tactics for using the fuses. Williams developed time on target, where many battalions fired at once so shells would hit together. When dozens of proximity fuse shells exploded at the right height, the sight and sound were like the end. German soldiers called it the bell toll of death. In the week between December 22nd and 29th, Patton's Third Army fired 50,000 proximity fuse shells. The results were decisive in breaking German resistance and opening the path to Bastogne. Patton himself wrote, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us, Elsenborn. Ridge holds the Battle of Elsenborn Ridge showed proximity, fuses at max power. Here the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions held key ground against the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the best 1st SS Panzer Division, Lippstandarte Adolf Hitler. Over 3 days, December 17th to 19th, American artillery fired 160,000 rounds, with about 40,000 being proximity fused. These 25% of shells made up about 60% of the 5,000-plus German casualties. The numbers were clear. Proximity fuses made American firepower 4 times stronger. The German attacks launched again up the steep wooded slopes met walls of air, burst steel. Whole companies vanished in seconds. Bodies piled so thick that later waves had to climb over their own dead. After 3 days, the attack stopped. The best of the Waffen-SS had been broken by American technology, Operation Bodenplatte destruction. On January 1st, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, 900 fighters attacking Allied airfields. The surprise was complete, catching many Allied aircraft on the ground. But returning German pilots met walls of proximity fused anti-aircraft. Fire of 277 German aircraft lost that day. 172 fell to anti-aircraft guns, most using proximity fuses. The kill rate stunned both sides. German pilots trained to dodge anti-aircraft fire found shells exploding exactly where they would cause the most damage. The Luftwaffe, already crippled, never recovered from these losses. Breaking the secret. By early January 1945, keeping secrecy became impossible. Too many shells had been fired. Too many soldiers had seen their effects. On January the 6th, the War Department allowed limited disclosure. The New York Times reported on a new type of artillery shell that multiplies the power of American guns without explaining the technology. German intelligence finally grasped the weapon's importance too late. A January 10th report from Foreign Armies West said, "The Americans have a radio-controlled artillery fuse that makes shells explode at the best height to hit soldiers. This weapon has caused heavy losses among our forces in the Ardennes. There are no good countermeasures." Strategic impact assessment. After the war, studies showed the huge effect of proximity fuses. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt said, "The proximity fuse was the deciding factor. Our attacks failed not because of American bravery, though they fought well, but because of artillery that seemed to have eyes." General Hasso Manteuffel, 5th Panzer Army commander said, "The American artillery was the terror of our men, especially the new shells that exploded in the air. They caused panic even among the best troops. The numbers told it all. 200,000 proximity fuse shells were fired, causing about 15 to 20,000 German deaths, up to 20% of all their losses. The weapon was 5 to 10 times more effective than normal shells and needed no observers even in bad weather." The human cost. Behind every number was real suffering. German soldiers, many just teenage boys forced to fight at the wars, and died in ways no one had imagined. They were killed by weapons that seemed alive that could find them anywhere. American factory workers also paid a price. Accidents were kept secret for safety workers at Crossley, Emerson Radio, and other plants broke down from stress and exhaustion. They made deadly weapons without knowing what they were making, forced to keep silent. But war is never simple. The Battle of the Bulge killed 19,000 Americans. Without proximity fuses, how many more would have died? How much longer would the war have lasted? How many more Holocaust victims would have died before freedom came? Each day the war was shortened, saved thousands in camps waiting for rescue. Technological legacy. The Proximity Fuse Project made inventions that shaped the modern world. The tiny vacuum tubes became the base for electronics. The strict quality control methods set new factory standards. The systems that linked hundreds of suppliers became modern supply chain management. Dr. James Van Allen used his skills in mini parts for satellites, later finding Earth's radiation belts. The radar ideas grew into modern systems, and the thought of sensors making their own choices became the base for guided missiles and all smart weapons. Every precision-guided bomb today comes from the proximity fuse. It was the first weapon that could sense its surroundings and decide when to explode. The change that began in the Ardennes still goes on in today's battlefields where smart weapons rule. Final reckoning. The Battle of the Bulge ended on January 25, 1945, with German forces running back Hitler's last attack cost Germany about 100,000 losses and gained nothing. America lost 75,000, including 19,000 killed. The proximity fuse proved to be not just a weapon, but a war winner. General Eisenhower said that if Germany had possessed proximity fuses, D-Day might have been much harder or even impossible, showing their great importance. They were not only an upgrade to artillery, but a new kind of science that changed war math forever. The German troops who faced proximity fuse shells met something new. Death from weapons that seemed alive, that could find them anywhere, that turned the air itself into a weapon. Their experience showed the start of the age of technology in war. From Colonel Axelson's first secret use on December 16, 1944, to the firing of 200,000 shells across the Ardennes, the proximity fuse proved how science could win battles. The mix of American factories, smart scientists, and fast-learning soldiers made a weapon that helped decide the war's end. The story of the proximity fuse is really about change in technology, tactics, and humanity. It proved that a free nation could build deadly strong weapons, that smart design could beat larger armies, and that the side with better science would win. These truths shaped not only the rest of World War II, but all wars after it. In the icy forests of the Ardennes, the time of high-tech warfare was born. The math of death was rewritten by tiny radar sets inside shells, forever changing how humans fight wars. The German soldiers who died under proximity-fused explosions were victims not just of a battle, but of a new kind of war that still shapes our world today.